All right, guys, welcome to 11.7. We're going to learn how to solve trig equations that have inside operations. That means usually we just have sine with a theta here, but now it's going to be sine, and inside of the sine function, we're going to have some numbers. So I'm calling those inside operations because they're inside the parentheses. Another way that you may hear me refer to them is augmented arguments. It's a fancy word there, but augmented means extra stuff. And argument is whenever you have a function, that's the stuff that is inside of the function. So these are functions who have extra stuff added to the inside of them. So that's it. So we're going to learn how to solve these. So let's go ahead and take a look at how these work. First of all, we'll start off with some steps here. I'll go ahead and just let you guys take a look at these first, and then we'll apply them. They'll make some sense. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that inside expression and just put a basic variable there. It doesn't matter what variable you use. I think I'm just always going to use the letter u. After that, we're going to find our general solution. After that, we're going to replace that basic variable, the u, with the inside expression again and solve for the actual variable we want, which is theta. And after that, we'll use the general solution to find particular solutions. So the big steps here that are kind of strange and new to you guys are step 1 and step 3. And it basically has to do with replacing the stuff on the inside of the parentheses with just one simple letter and pretending like it's just a simple letter instead. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's go ahead and jump into our first example here. So we're going to be solving some problems here today, and our goal is to find out what theta, or what angle between 0 and 360 would actually work for this, where if I plugged it in, I would get 0 as an output. So that's the goal there. Let's go ahead and get started on number 1. Okay, so sine of what equals 0? That's what we're looking for. And after we find that what, we're going to find out what theta would be to make that work. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through our steps that I gave you guys. The first step is to replace this whole thing here, everything inside the parentheses, with a simple letter. And I'm just going to always use u. So let's pretend like there's not a whole bunch of stuff in there right now. And let's just pretend it's a regular sine function where sine of u equals 0. Well, let's go ahead and solve that. We're going to be using our unit circle for this. Now, sine of u equals 0 at 2 places, at 0 degrees and also at 180 degrees. Okay? Now, step B. Step B says let's write these as a general solution. So we don't want to leave them as a particular solution there. We want to go ahead and write them as a general solution. So 0 plus, now for sine, it's 360 times n. Now remember, for sine, cosine, secant, and cosecant, those have periods of 360, so that's what we'll use here. Now if we're doing tangent or cotangent, we'll add 180 to it. All right? But that's the end of step 2. So step 1, replace all the inside stuff with a simple letter. Step 2, write those solutions as general solutions. Now step 3, this is another strange step. Now that we have this equation, I'm going to replace this u with what it was originally. Okay, so I'm going to take these two equations that I have down here, and I'm going to replace the u with negative 2 theta plus 180. Okay? Now, I'm going to do that again for the other one. Let me make a little space here. I'm going to replace this u with negative 2 theta plus 180 also. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve both of these equations here. Okay, so for the first one up there on the top, I want to get the theta by itself. So what would I have to do to get theta by itself? The first thing I would have to do is minus the 180 here to the other side. Next, I would divide everything by -2. That gives me 90 and minus 180n. Now, whether you put a minus or a positive here doesn't really matter, because what the n does is it basically just means we could put negatives or positives in there for n, so it's going to be adding or subtracting either way. But in this case, I'll just make it minus 180, why not? So there's one answer. We're going to repeat that process with the next one here. We're going to subtract 180 on both sides. Those go away. Oh, I forgot my n there. And I get negative 180 times n. So I've got two answers. Now, these are not the final answers, but I want to box these really quick. Those are not the final answers. We do want to find some specific solutions. These are still just general solutions. But let's review. What did I do first? I took the inside and I made it just a single letter and found the answers for that. Then I wrote the general solution for those answers. And then I replaced the u with what it was originally and solved for the variable I actually want, which is theta. Okay, so now we're ready for the last step. The last step is to use those general solutions to generate some particular answers. So we have n, and we're going to put our these two formulas here on this side. So we have 90 minus 180n, and then we have negative 180n. And what we want to do is we want to generate as many answers as we can that are between 0 and 360. Okay? And so let's go ahead and get down to business here. So I always like to start with 0 in the middle of my table. So if I were to plug 0 in up here, I would have 180 times 0 is 0. So 90 minus 0 is just 90. And if I plugged it in here, I'm just going to get 0. Now both of those are good. Those are on my interval here. So I'll keep both of those answers. Now, since these are negatives, I think I'm going to go ahead and plug in a negative to cancel out the negative. So let's plug in a negative 1. Raise that up a little bit. Plug in a negative 1. So if I were to plug a negative 1 in here, I would have 90 minus 180 times negative 1. Now this is a double negative, so you're going to end up with a positive as a result. That's why I wanted to plug in a negative, so I'd end up adding something. And that gives me 270. So that's for the first one there. What would happen if I were to plug in negative 1 to my other general formula? I would get positive 180. So far, both of those are still on my interval that I want, so that's good. I'm thinking that if we try to do anything else, we're going to go outside of our interval, but I'll try it anyway. Let me plug 2 into these really quick. So if I were to plug 2, and negative 2 that is, into this, I'm going to end up with 450. And that's too far, so we're going to cross that off. If I were to plug in negative 2 here, I'm going to get 360. Now, depending on how they write the problem, you may use the 360 or not. Do you guys see how there's no equal sign under the little less than symbol there? That means we're not going to use the 360. If they had an equal sign underneath, we would include it, but we're not going to include it in this case. So there's that. So those are done. Let's try to see what happens if we plug in 1. I don't think 1's going to work either, just doing some mental math here. If you plug in 1, you're going to get negative 90 on this one and negative 180. And both of those are less than the 0 here, so those are not on our interval. And so we end up having these 4 answers here. I'll go ahead and highlight them for you. But here is the actual final answer. All right, so that is our 4-step process that we're going to be going through for these types of problems. Okay? So I'm going to do a couple of examples with you guys, and then I'm going to let you do a couple of examples, and then we'll move on. So let's go ahead and move on to another example one. I'm going to do tangent. Tangent is a little bit different, as you guys may recall. Now, these problems are very process heavy. In other words, there's a lot of steps involved. And so at this point, what I would encourage you guys to do is I would encourage you to start pausing the videos here and seeing if you can do each step before me. So what would the first step be? Pause the video, see if you guys can do that. The first step would look like this. The first thing you were supposed to do is replace everything on the inside here with a simple letter, and I just choose to use the letter U. Okay? All right, go ahead and solve for U now. This is still part of the first step. So go ahead and solve for U. All right. As I'm solving this, I think the answer would be 200, and no, that's not right. It's going to be 150 and 330, if I'm not mistaken. There's that. Let's go ahead and pause the video here and try, see if you could do step B. B is to write the general solution, but be careful. We are doing tangent, and that means something when you do a general solution. So actually, it means two things. First of all, when you have a tangent, you don't need to use both answers. You only need to use one. So I'm going to go with the smaller. Oops, I erased too much. I'm going to go with the smaller one. I'm just going to pick the 150. That's one difference, is you only have to have one of them. The other difference is that instead of adding 360, we add 180 to it. So that's the end of step B. All right, let's do step C. This is a new and strange step here. So once again, I would encourage you to pause the video here and give it a try. This is where we replace the U with what it was originally, and we solve for theta. So go ahead and pause the video here and give that a try. When you unpause it, I'll go through it with you. All right. So if I replace this U with negative 4 theta plus 180, it would look, my equation would look like this. All right, now we got to solve. So I'm going to minus 180 on both sides. Leaves me with negative 30, forgot my n there, plus 180n. And then we're going to divide everything by a negative 4. And we might end up with a decimal. I don't know, let's see. Theta equals, what does that make? I believe 30 divided by 4. I think it's 7.5 if I'm not mistaken. And then plus 45n. 45n. So there's my general solution. Let's go ahead and move on to our last step. Which is where we're going to generate some specific solutions here. All right, and once again, I would encourage you guys to pause the video here and give this a try and see how you do with it. Oh, you know what I just realized is that this was supposed to be a negative 4, which means that this was supposed to be a minus 45. It probably wouldn't have made a big difference, honestly, but we'll do that. All right, so once again, I'm going to pause the video and see what you guys get. Once again, we're looking for answers between 0, include the 0, and 360, but don't include the 360. All right? So I like to start by plugging in 0. Now, when you plug in 0, it always cancels the part out that has the n, so we just have the 7.5 left there. Let's go ahead and plug in a negative. So once again, we've got a minus here, so I'm going to go ahead and go with a negative. I think we're going to get quite a few answers out of this one because this is a really small number, which means that we can fit lots of answers inside of this interval. So let's see what we get. If I were to plug in negative 1, to become plus 45, and if I add that to 7.5, we would get 52.5, I believe. All right, and we're just going to keep doing that. Let's do negative 2. Now, if I were to plug -2 in, let's see what else we would get. I'm going to use my calculator here a little bit. 97.5. I think we can do -3 also. I think we're going to have a lot of answers here. Because like I said, since we're going by just 45, it's going up in little pieces every time. So I got to make room here. I ran out of room. Clear that out. -5 also. 232.5. You guys might be wondering how I'm doing this so fast. I'll tell you in just a second. Basically, what I'm doing is we're just going up by 45 each time. So this is plus 45, plus 45, plus 45, plus 45. You can do that too. Usually when you go up in this direction with negatives, you'll subtract 45. But since we had a negative here, it's the opposite. So let's go ahead and do it again. If we were to plug in -7, we would get 322.5. And I don't think we're going to be able to fit any more on there. Yeah, the next one goes over. So -8, if I were to plug in a -8, I get 367.5, but that's past 360, so we get rid of it. Now, I don't think we're going to be able to go in the positive direction. If you were to plug 1 in to our formula over here, you're going to end up with a negative. 7.5 minus 45 would be -37.5, and that's no good. So we have quite a few answers there. Quite a few. And that'll happen anytime this number over here is small. If this number over here is really big, then you're going to have very few answers. You might not have any. And if it's really small, you'll have more answers. All right. Let's go ahead and do one more example here. Let's take a look at secant. All right, so part A, once again, I would encourage you guys to do these steps here on your own, because like I said, there's a lot of steps here. So if you just try to jump in and do the whole thing all at once without little practices along the way, you're probably going to get overwhelmed. So pause the video here and try this first step. What would the first step look like? Okay, so the first step would look like this. That would be the first thing you do, is replace all this stuff here with a u. The next step would be to solve this, and so we're going to do the reciprocal on both sides. The reciprocal of secant is cosine, and the reciprocal of this funny looking number over here is that. Multiplying the top and the bottom by the square root of 3, we get that. These cancel. And finally, I'm left with something familiar. Cosine is the square root of 3 over 2. And then from there, we can find out what u equals by looking at our unit circle. Cosine is equal to radical 3 over 2 at 30 degrees, and also at 330 degrees. Okay? All right, go ahead and pause the video here and do step B. Step B is to write the general solution. And since this is cosine, you need both of them. You need both the 30 and the 330. And both of them have a period of 360. Like so. So that's the end of step B. Let's go ahead and move on to step C. Go ahead and pause the video here and give step C a try. When you unpause it, we'll have the answer up there for you. So we have 3 theta plus 120 is equal to 30 plus 360. And we have 3 theta plus 120 is equal to 330 plus 360. All right. And we're going to solve both of these equations. So here we go, minus the 120. Got my n. Keep doing that, darn it. All right, next one. All right, so there we go. There are my two general solutions. Let's just move this one over here. There we go. All right, let's move on to step D. So let's go ahead and have you guys go ahead and pause the video here and give step D a try. So we have our two general solutions here, negative 30 plus 120n. And then we have 70 plus 120n. And just so the video doesn't go horribly long, I'm going to go ahead and work all these out and pause the video. When I pause it, the answers will just pop up on your screen. But remember, I do recommend starting at 0. And interestingly, you'll notice that if I plug in 0, I have negative 30 here and 70 here. And we're not going to use that negative 30 there. So, but anyway, I'm going to pause the video and put the rest of the answers up, and you'll see it in just a minute. So if you haven't done it yet, I would encourage you to pause it too and work those out. All right, guys, so there are the 5 answers for that one. 90, 210, 330, 70, and 190. Let's go ahead and move on. I think I might have missed an answer here, actually. Let me fix that. There should have been one more in this row. I believe it's 310. There we go. All right, there we go. Now we got all of our answers. 6 of them. All right, now we can move on. Okay, guys, so we're going to treat this one like a student practice. I want you guys to try to knock this one out completely on your own from beginning to end. And when you unpause the video, you'll see all 4 steps worked out. So go ahead and pause the video now and give it a try and see how you do. All right. So there are the answers for that one. If you didn't get those right, I've paused the video here and kind of study to see where maybe you went wrong. But that being said, we'll go ahead and move on. So here's another student practice for you guys that I'd like you to pause the video on and give this one a try. This one is different. It's cotangent. And so that results in a few differences. So once again, go ahead and pause the video here. And see if you guys can work this one out. And when you unpause the video, you will see all 4 steps displayed. All right, guys, and so there's the solutions for that one, 285, 195, 105, and 15. If you didn't get that, I would encourage you to pause the video here and kind of look and see where you might have went wrong. Some things to draw your attention to for this one is the fact that on part B, we only have one equation because when you do tangent or cotangent, that's all you need to do. Also, you'll notice that it's 180n in the general solution there, and it's not 360. Once again, that's for tangent and cotangent. So there's that outcome, and I think we'll go ahead and stop it there for the day, guys. So hopefully that was helpful, and we will see you guys in class. Until then, have a good one.